It's my honor to welcome you to our forum for candidates for U.S. Congressional District 1. I'm Jen Winkler, President of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. This forum is presented by our league in partnership with the Snohomish County Forum Coalition. We thank these coalition members for their continued support. C3 Coalition, AAUW, Edmonds College, the Daily Herald, KSER, KXIR, NAACP, Sultan School District, and Snow Isle Libraries. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920, the same year the women won the vote. For 100 years, we have been a nonpartisan activist grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. In 1976, the League sponsored the first televised presidential debates, winning an Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Broadcast Journalism. We have been upholding that tradition right here in Snohomish County by sponsoring forums for local, state, and federal offices. Since our organization neither supports nor opposes candidates or political parties, we feel we provide a thoughtful environment that allows voters to make their own informed choices. It's my pleasure to turn you over to our moderator for this forum, League member Karen Madsen.
Thank you, Jen. We sure appreciate your leadership in the League. I'm Karen Madsen, League member and past president. This forum will run about an hour. Today's questions were prepared with input from community members and are quite comprehensive. We will not be taking additional questions from our live audience for this event. The recording of this forum will be available on this same YouTube channel for later viewing. We want to give a special shout out to our live stream sponsor, the Sultan School District, with technical help from Dave Moon and a terrific team of students at turkpride.tv. This forum features candidates for U.S. Congressional District 1. Remember that with the recent redistricting, district lines have changed a bit, and District 1 now crosses the Snohomish-King County line and runs from Arlington in the north to Kirkland and Redmond in the south. Candidates for U.S. District 1, U.S. Congressional District 1 are Vincent Cavaleri and Suzan DelBene. Both candidates are with us today. We thank these candidates for running for office and for their willingness to serve if elected and for their participation in this forum. We remind our viewers that the League is nonpartisan, so we do not endorse or oppose candidates or parties. We do educate and support voters and the election process in our communities. The rules for forum participation were sent ahead of time to each of the participants, and they've agreed to engage in respectful communication throughout the event. Let me briefly explain the question and answer period rules, and then we'll begin. Each candidate will have either 60 or 90 seconds to respond to each question. I'll state those changes clearly. Near the end of the questioning period, we'll offer each candidate the opportunity to ask a question of her or his opponent based on the issues they've heard raised in this forum. Candidates will have 30 seconds to pose the question and 60 seconds to respond. I'll change the starting order for each question, alternating candidates in the starting position to ensure a fair sequence. The order for the first question will be Ms. DelBene, followed by Mr. Cavaleri. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond to this first question, and I will ask Ms. DelBene to lead off. And the question is, what qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position?
Thank you so much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. All the forums that you do across the region are so important. I'm Suzan DelBene. I've represented the 1st Congressional District since 2012. I have a background originally in science and biotechnology, in technology and business. And I think it's so important that we have folks who are focused on getting things done in Congress. Things are challenging right now for families across the 1st District. Now more than ever, we need the sort of pragmatic leadership that I've been committed to delivering. My focus is on tackling inflation, rebuilding our middle class, standing up to the extremes, and protecting our rights in our democratic institutions. And I have a track record of focusing on substance, not on performative posturing. I'm not interested in divisive point scoring and hyperpartisanship that's rampant in the other Washington And I appreciate your
Thank
support.
you very much, Ms. DelBene. Mr. Cavaleri?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, Sultan High School. Go Turks. And thank you, everybody, for your participation this evening in setting this opportunity up for us to have this discussion. I am Mill Creek Councilman, Snohomish County Sheriff's Deputy, Vincent Cavaleri. I have served my community honorably for about the past 33 years. I've served as a soldier, I've served as a sheriff's deputy, and I currently serve as a councilman, where we as a city have been able to do a few things during a rough time in American history that really kind of shine a light and show what success looks like through a collaboration of efforts. Our city is a shining city on the hill at this point. We've been rated a #1 city twice in the last 10 years during my tenure, and I'm very proud of that fact. I hope to really get into some substantive issues tonight as we join and have these conversations. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
You're very welcome. The timer will now change the time to be 90 seconds for a number of questions to come. Mr. Cavaleri, you'll lead off on this next question. What would you hope to see as priorities for the House of Representatives for the next 2 years?
Well, you don't need a degree in economics to see how inflation is running rampant. It is crushing every American family and across every sector. Our economy is in the shambles, and the direction that America is moving in, it's in a direction that's not going to get any better. It's going to continue to get worse. What I hope to accomplish is to stop the wasteful spending in the House of Representatives. We continue to spend money we don't have. The credit card should have been cut up quite a while ago. So as Americans try to struggle to get out of this, there are several things I'd like to see first. First, stopping the spending. Second, unleashing America's energy independence on the world. It's important to note that what we're experiencing now is self-inflicted to some degree, because we fell asleep at the wheel and allowed a narrative of trying to kill the energy sector in America, and we're suffering for it. All the products we get in America are traveled to and from land, air, and sea by the fossil fuel industry. So we moved too quickly to the green industry, and we're paying the price for it now. And you're seeing that as Americans continue to suffer. Get the economy under control and get crime under control. Those are my top two.
Thank you. Ms. DelBene, same question.
Thank you. This is a challenging time for our communities, and I do think our priorities need to be tackling inflation, rebuilding our middle class, making sure that we are protecting our rights and our democratic institutions. I have a track record of making a difference and working in a bipartisan fashion, which is so important for us to actually get things done. I led the expansion of the child tax credit, which dramatically cut child poverty and helped families all across the country. I've helped enact legislation to strengthen the low-income housing tax credit, which is creating 130,000 affordable homes across the country. There's more that I'm working on to do there, because housing is a key part of the challenges that folks in our community are facing. And we came together to pass in Congress the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I've made sure delivers direct benefits right here to our region, to Snohomish County, so that we really are building the foundation that's so critical for economic growth going forward. And I do think that it's so important that we continue to make sure that we focus on the issues that matter to our community, making sure that everyone has affordable quality healthcare, protecting Social Security and Medicare. We've been able to lower prescription drug prices. We need to continue to build on that and move forward.
Thank you. Ms. DelBene, please take the lead on this next question about access to abortion. Would you support or oppose federal legislation that would assure access to abortion? With what limits, if any?
So thank you for this very, very important question. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade will be remembered as a very dark moment in American history. I absolutely support a woman's right to make her own reproductive health decisions, and access to abortion. I think this is a right should may be retained across the country. The majority on the Supreme Court, and a conservative majority, has stripped women of their constitutional right to make their own healthcare decisions, and throughout nearly 50 years of legal precedent. And this is going to be disproportionately felt by women, by lower income women and women of color. They will have to travel hundreds of miles to receive the healthcare they need, or be forced to carry a pregnancy against their will or against what's best for their health. This is really a fundamental decision that shouldn't depend on which state you live in or where you happen to be visiting. Republicans have been clear that they will pursue an extreme nationwide abortion ban should they take back control of Congress. And make no mistake, this will not just stop at abortion. Already in Idaho, we're seeing folks being deprived access to basic birth control. So absolutely, we need to stand up for women and their reproductive rights.
Mr. Cavaleri, your perspective?
Thank you. First things first is I would not support a national ban. I think that Senator Lindsey Graham, in probably his mind, his good intentions, simply got it wrong. I think his attempt to usurp the court is one of the problems with both parties. The Supreme Court in this case got it right. America is a constitutional republic, and in a constitutional republic, we give deference to the Constitution. They did not eliminate Roe v. Wade, and I think that's the argument that's been peddled throughout America to create hysteria. What they said is that the abortion legislation will go back to the states where you have the most access to your local legislators, and that's where the decisions and rules and regulations will be governed from. They understood that the 10th Amendment says the power not granted to the federal government will be given to the states. And I absolutely agree with it. And I'm disappointed that the vitriolic argument on both sides has led to the picketing and parading of Supreme Court justices' homes. It's led to hitmen being arrested outside Supreme Court justices' homes. And that is not America. That is not our process. It has gone through the court process, and here is where we are. Roe v. Wade was not overturned. You have a right to an abortion in Washington state today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's talk a little more about the Supreme Court. Mr. Cavaleri, if you take the lead on this one, would you support or oppose any changes to the U.S. Supreme Court? Please explain your response.
Absolutely. Good question. I absolutely would not. When you hear, there's nothing that probably makes me cringe or gives me that awful feeling in my gut when I hear the term packing the Supreme Court or adding members to the Supreme Court. Our three branches of government are separate and unique in and of themselves. And the Supreme Court has no more power really than the other gives it. Sadly, there's this incorrect view that the Supreme Court somehow makes laws, and they do not. What the Supreme Court does is they rule on matters that have been through the court on a constitutional basis. Simple as that. This Supreme Court, to their credit, got it right on a lot of issues this year, going back to the structural and foundational Constitution foundation that our republic demands. So I would not support packing the Supreme Court. I think packing the Supreme Court or adding members would turn America into what the term we call, you hear the term banana republic. That's exactly one of those starts. Same thing with eliminating the filibuster. Trying to usurp our courts and our Constitution is not acceptable, and I would oppose that adamantly at every level in the House of Representatives. Thank you.
Ms. DelBene, your perspective?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm deeply concerned with the Supreme Court's decision with respect to women's rights, women's reproductive rights. This was 50 years of settled law, and now we are in a place where the Supreme Court has taken away those rights. I also think it's important to remember that we've had Republicans in the Senate try to prevent a president under President Obama from being able to appoint because they wanted to wait till an election, this ongoing battle to pack the Supreme Court. So I do think that we can make adjustments that will make sure the Supreme Court continues to reflect the will of the people. I do think that we can have term limits and set it up so that we have legislation or a process that allows presidents on a regular basis to be appointing Supreme Court justices. So we have legislation in Congress, legislation that I support too, that would do that, the Supreme Court, and also make sure that we have ethics for the Supreme Court. I think that's very important, that we have guidelines there, ethical guidelines for the Supreme Court. So those are two areas where I think we have legislation in place that could make a difference.
Let's talk for a minute about voting rights. And the question first to you, Ms. DelBene, is what measures, if any, would you support to protect voting rights and to secure election systems across the nation?
Well, absolutely. I think that one of the things that's on the ballot right now is voting rights for everyone across the country. It has been terrible to see the ongoing efforts to kind of undermine access to the ballot across the country. We've seen lies, Republican lies about election fraud. We are in a place where we still have folks even disputing the results of an election. So one thing that we can definitely do is pass legislation to affirm the Voting Rights Act from 1960s and make sure that everyone has access to the ballot. We have legislation that we put forward that's passed in the House to do just that, to make sure that people's voting rights are not taken away, and that we do everything possible to make it easy for folks to vote, like we do here in Washington State, where we have vote by mail, where we make the ability to sign up for voting easy for folks, because it's so important that everyone's voice is heard across the country. So absolutely passing legislation for voting rights would be very, very important, something we pass in the House. The Senate has not taken up, but to affirm that everyone in this country should make sure that they use their opportunity to vote and make sure their voice is heard.
Mr. Cavaleri, please weigh in.
Again, and I'll disagree with my opponent here. It is not the federal government's job to oversee elections. It is the state's jobs, and it's the state's constitutions that create the laws and the parameters therein. And you're seeing court cases constantly throughout the country get overturned because, you know, some of the processes that have been implemented as far as, you know, campaigning and voting lines, et cetera. And you've seen this kind of what can only be construed as electioneering or ballot box stuffing. These matters are for the courts in the states, right? Nobody belongs having their votes suppressed, and it's not happening. There is nothing wrong with asking for identification when you go to vote. I absolutely am 100% behind that. Every American citizen has the right to vote, and I think where we kind of get off the rails is that too many people who are not American citizens or simply not eligible to vote are voting in some elections. Now, election denying takes place on both sides. So Stacey Abrams in Georgia still has not conceded, and nor has Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that's not exclusive to Republicans. It's a systemic issue. Again, it's where these folks fell in love with keeping the debate alive. If you're in America, you have the right to vote. I will make sure you have access to vote with my blessing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. Cavaleri, let's talk climate change for a moment. What, if anything, do you believe the United States should be doing to mitigate the impact of climate change on the world?
So we'll agree that the climate is always changing. Throughout the world's history, the climate has always changed. When I was a young man, the ozone layer was collapsing. Next, I believe the polar ice caps were melting. And then it was something else, I can't think of it, but I want to stick to a narrative. There is nobody more than me that wants clean energy and clean water in America. I absolutely support that. However, you've seen what's going on with the climate change debate, what's happening in America. What you have now is they've shut down the fossil fuel industry for the most part in America. So now when it cost an American, or anybody for that matter, $6, $7, $8 a gallon for gas, when their home heating and oil bills are now doubled in favor of a climate change agenda, you've seen it go off the rails, and real people are feeling this. And who feels this the most? And I'll be honest, if gas is $6, $7 a gallon, I can probably figure it out in this life, and I've been blessed in that regard. But who suffers are our folks in the inner city, the folks who are less fortunate, forcing them onto public transportation that is now one of the most dangerous modes of transportation, according to the DOT. And so, again, I'm happy to have the discussion, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not there technological wise to eliminate fossil fuels. Thank you.
Ms. DelBene, what do you think?
I think all of us can look out our windows and right now see smoke because we've had increased wildfires across our region, temperatures that have been extremely high for the month of October. We've seen increased flooding and wildfires, heat dome. All of these things are the direct impact of climate change right here on our region. It's impacting our farmers, it's impacting families and our communities. And absolutely, there are many things we can do. One, we can invest in clean renewable energy, and we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to make sure that we are investing in clean renewable energy. Not only is that about independence, it's about helping our communities and using the innovative spirit that we have right here in Washington State, because we can build a clean energy economy that will be great for our state. The work that we're doing right here in hydrogen, the work to roll out electrification across our region, also important to making sure that we have a healthy environment for everyone in our state and around the world. The lack of investment, the lack of focus on climate has already had a huge impact on communities throughout the United States, around the world. There's more we can do, and we've made a very important first step with the legislation on infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act this Congress.
Next, we have a question on violent firearms incidents. What do you believe, Ms. DelBene, are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in our country?
Well, first, I think that we have an opportunity to put common sense legislation in place. There is absolutely more we can do at the federal level. This is something that impacts all levels of government, but we passed legislation to start doing some very basic things with respect to things like background checks. There's more we can do. I believe we should have an assault weapons ban. I don't believe that people need assault weapons, and that impacts the ability of our law enforcement to also respond. There's strong support across the country for common sense legislation too. So whether it's high capacity magazines, assault weapons, these are all reasonable, responsible policies that we should put in place, that I support and that will protect our communities. There is not one piece of legislation we can do that will stop all incidents of gun violence across the country, but there's much more that we can do to help reduce gun violence. The United States has a greater amount of gun violence than other countries around the world because we haven't put in common sense pieces of legislation like we've been talking about in Congress, and that I support. So I'd love to see that happen because we've seen the impact right here on our communities too. Thank you.
Mr. Cavaleri, your best 3 ideas?
Our Second Amendment is very clear and very concise. The rights to bear arms shall not be infringed. And I don't say this callously. I say this because when you talk about bans and you talk about restrictions, as the Supreme Court just ruled just this year, and as it ruled in 2008, the only thing that does is create barriers for legal gun ownership. So it's proven that states with the most restrictive and toughest gun laws in the nation are also the highest in violent crime and gun violence. So what that tells you is that the bad guys don't have a problem finding a gun. They're going to find one and they're going to be bad guys. What we can't have is revolving door justice, putting them back out on the street, cash bail reform, where they continue to have carte blanche and prey on the rest of America. Again, this is one of those things where the Supreme Court got it right again this year and affirmed the Second Amendment. And I would also note that we don't hear enough of the thousands of stories of the good guys with a gun, the good guys with the gun that may have hindered or stopped an incident. So long story short, I would not support bans. I think they're restrictive. I think they violate the constitutional liberties guaranteed to every American citizen, and I would not support anything nationally. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So now, Mr. Cavaleri, take the lead on this next question about working with your House colleagues. If elected, what ideas do you have for working productively with your House colleagues across the aisle, or just those with different opinions, toward the goal of more effective governance?
So the last time we were here at the League of Women Voters, a student asked this same question in a roundabout way, and I found it to be the most, not only the most charming, but probably the most important question, because it's something that all of us feel deep in our bones that's missing. I've made a career of, and I could use all the terms reaching across the aisle, bipartisan and whatnot, but building teams, building coalitions, and building these opportunities and bridges to get things done. My city, when I said it's a shining example of a city on a hill, we have 4 straight balanced budget, unanimous. We have passed some of the most sweeping anti-camping legislation in the state. We have put in some of the most toughest drug laws in the city to make drugs illegal again, as crazy as that sounds. So these are the examples of what happens when you can build consensus with Democrats and Republicans. We are a 50-50 split roughly in Mill Creek. I'm very proud of that fact, because no one party or no one person has all the right ideas, all the right insight. America and all the things, everything, every law that we ever pass, every bill that's presented that is successful is because both parties got involved. They reached across the aisle. They hammered it out because they were able to find a sweet spot where everybody agreed. One party rule like we have now is the polar opposite of what you're talking about. Thank you.
Ms. DelBene, your thoughts?
I believe that folks want to see governance work. And I felt the whole time that I've been in Congress how important it is that we don't just talk about things, but that we focus on getting things done. And I have a track record of doing that. And much of my legislative work is bipartisan. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished. Just to give you some examples, just even in the last few months, legislation to reduce tariffs on baby formula. So we increase availability of formula on the shelves. 2 pieces of legislation that I helped lead that were bipartisan in the House and in the Senate, and were signed by the president. We recently passed legislation in the House of Representatives to address the issue of prior authorization, where seniors who are looking, whose doctors recommend they have a procedure, many times are waiting for authorization from Medicare Advantage from an insurance company. Many times that's fax machines, things like that, that delay access to care. I led legislation, strongly bipartisan, that passed in the House of Representatives with unanimous support to address this issue, to use electronic forms or electronic communication standard forms to speed up access to healthcare for our seniors. So that's my work that I've been doing since I've been a member and will continue to do to get things done for our district.
Let's talk inflation. Ms. DelBene, what are your ideas for policies to curb inflation in the United States?
Thanks for the question. And, it's so important that as we talk to our families and communities right now, that we focus on the challenges that they're facing. And right now they're facing increased costs in so many areas. We've had a strong economic recovery in some ways, but prices are still a top concern for families as we're feeling increasing costs from spike in global inflation. I've been focused on policies that will lower costs for families. And I am the chair of the New Democrat Coalition, a group of about 100 Democrats in the House of Representatives. And We put together an inflation reduction plan earlier this year that was called the Best Inflation Fighting Blueprint to come out of Congress yet. It outlines steps that Congress and the administration can take to ensure that we address the costs of everyday necessities like food and gas, including things like passing the CHIPS and Science Act, which we did with bipartisan support, passing a reconciliation bill that spurs green energy production and keeps our healthcare costs low by protecting the subsidies that many families are using for healthcare right now. In fact, 60,000 people in Washington got coverage using those subsidies from the Affordable Care Act. Building more affordable housing to help with housing costs. Those are a few examples.
Mr. Cavaleri, your thoughts about curbing inflation?
Yeah, this is going to be a long question, or it will probably dovetail into several answers. So inflation's not going away anytime soon. You would think, I heard my opponent touting the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act, which by the way, has nothing to do with in reducing inflation, except adding to the deficit another $750 billion. You would think with 30.5 trillion in debt that we would understand that to stop inflation, you have to stop the spending. You have to cut up the credit card. You cannot continue to hand out money and borrow money and spend it like a drunken sailor, which is what's happened in America. Again, they brought up the baby formula just a moment ago. That is still ongoing. Do you know that is still ongoing, and it was self-inflicted? So what you don't do to curb inflation is hire 87,000 IRS agents and hope to grow government to combat it. What you don't do is continue to spend money what you don't have. So what I would do is unleash America's energy sector. Everything we have in this country is shipped, trained, it's planed, it's sent elsewhere. This is the problem. America's business sector has been shut down, the energy sector, the business sector, the ability to even flourish. We've lost $7 trillion of wealth in the last year alone, and Americans are suffering.
Mr. Cavaleri, on to another difficult topic. Based on our healthcare system's response to COVID-19, what changes, if any, would you recommend to prepare for a possible future pandemic?
I think what we certainly saw as we start to dissect it now, looking backward, what we saw during the pandemic is that how ill prepared that we were, but also that we succumbed to fear. We allowed fear to be the master, and generations are suffering for it. The pandemic, albeit real, we still have a lot of questions to answer. We still don't know or have definitive answers, where it came from, how deadly it really is, and how many people actually died. So I hope to hold hearings. I hope to have these inquiries. I hope to ask these questions in Congress, and in some cases interrogate some of these folks who've become what I believe are bad actors. I think many Americans are still spooked to this day. It's unfortunate. We have 6.5 million lives that were lost due to COVID, and they still don't have answers. We're forcing people and still terminating people because of vaccines that we found out not only don't stop COVID, they don't stop the spread of COVID. So there's a lot, this is a big question here. I hope to get into it further, and you'll see that some of us at the very beginning had it right, while many of us, especially the federal government, had it absolutely wrong, and a generation is now suffering for it. Thank you.
Ms. DelBene, your ideas?
First, I want to thank so many folks in our region who responded to those first cases of COVID, which were here in Snohomish County. We're the first cases in the country. And so many of our first responders and leaders who acted to protect our communities when there was very little information. Now, I think what we've learned is the importance of public health, and to make sure that we have strong investments in our public health infrastructure, because they really can help drive a process of protecting our communities, getting information out. We know that manufacturing issues, for example, with personal protective equipment, it's so important that we have domestic capacity. When we look at supply chains, that's also important, something we've already taken action on in terms of looking at supply chains, and the CHIPS and Science Act is one example of that. we have to be led by the science, and our investments in research that have also led to the ability to come up with a vaccine so quickly. We've seen this also with vaccines already available to help address monkeypox cases. These are other areas where our investment in science is going to be and continues to be critically important. We need to learn what worked and what didn't work from the experiences we've gone through and build on that for our communities.
Next, we have a question about the criminal justice system for you to lead off with, Ms. DelBene. What, if any, actions should be taken at the federal level to make the criminal justice system more equitable?
Thank you for the question as well. This is a really important question for all levels of government, that we are looking at what's happening in our communities, look at what resources are needed, and making sure that we're putting policies in place to help our communities. I believe in supporting law enforcement, those who put their lives on the line to protect our communities, give them the tools and the resources that they need, while also making sure that we have accountability for the people that they serve. We often ask police to do too much for our communities when there are other proven alternatives that can help. So we need to invest in mental health services to those suffering from behavioral issues, and make sure that they have the appropriate healthcare resources that they need. We need to make sure that we have gun violence prevention to limit the risk to officers and to families. Community-based policing. In fact, we have some good examples right here in our region, working on with community-based policing to build that trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We've passed legislation in Congress. The American Rescue Plan provided $350 billion to cities and states and counties that helped to invest. And we recently passed more legislation in the House of Representatives to make sure we have resources to help our public safety community.
Mr. Cavaleri.
We now know that, I hope we all know that defunding the police or reimagining policing was probably one of the stupidest things to ever come out of anybody's mouth that held elected office. We know that the defunding or reimagining police, who it affects the most is minorities in the inner cities. We know that for a fact. We know that gun violence is at record levels in their cities. They have become captives in their own communities due to crime, due to cash bail reform, due to revolving door justice, and due to the defunding nonsense. So these folks have been targeted, unfortunately, in their own, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, and are directly in the crosshairs of all the violence because of the policies created by the party in power. They have to own every bit of it. You don't get to start the dumpster fire, walk away, and then blame the arson investigator when they show up. Police officers aren't being hired on in numbers like they used to be, so they're not showing up to 911 calls in the numbers they're supposed to, and perhaps not in the same time. We've done a few things in our city to hire and bring officers on and create policies to make our city safe. But what you see now is a systemic system that was okay and could have used a few tweaks is now moving in the wrong direction once again. And again, the people you claim to protect are the ones you're now targeting for almost destruction. Thank you.
Mr. Cavaleri, please take the lead on this question about access to the internet. What actions, if any, would you support to ensure broad access to internet and computers across our state and our country?
Well, I believe, so we all know that technology has taken the world by storm. We all know that America leads the world in technological advancement. The fact that when you hear stories that there are communities that don't have access to the internet, or children don't have access to laptops or whatever, that's alarming and that's upsetting. But I believe it's more the exception, not the rule. I believe it's the states and the communities and the school boards' roles at that level. The federal government, I believe they can provide the resources and it can provide the experts and all the know-how, but this is more of a state level issue. So providing resources and getting them to the people in need, identifying those folks and making sure we take care of them is certainly something that's necessary, especially if they want to, succeed in the 21st century. Thank you.
Ms. DelBene, internet access?
Thank you. The region that I currently represent, the 1st Congressional District, is one of the biggest technology hubs on the globe. And yet you can drive an hour away from that part of the district to areas that have no broadband access and not even good cell service right here in our region. So this has been a top priority of mine for a long time, because this really is about equity. When we look at telehealth and how often that's used, being able to have access to healthcare, kids access to educational materials and that broad educational experience, businesses and having economic opportunity, all of those depend on making sure we have strong broadband access. In the infrastructure legislation, which we passed legislation to get dollars to our communities. Washington State will get $100 million to help provide service across our state. And we also have 1.4 million Washingtonians getting help with their internet bill, because not only is it about access to the internet, but also about affordability. And we know we've had folks in our communities who haven't been able to afford those bills. So I think we've made progress in addressing both of those, but we have to make sure we get to every single home across our state and across the country.
Now we'll talk for a moment about healthcare system. What's your position, Ms. DelBene, on a single payer healthcare system in the United States administered by the federal government? Why do you hold this position?
So thanks for the question. Healthcare is such an incredibly important issue for everyone. And we know, especially having seen the impact of the pandemic, how important it is that everyone in our region and across the country has affordable quality healthcare. I think that there's many things that we can do to make sure we continue that. And one thing that we've done that was incredibly important as part of the Inflation Reduction Act was allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. The cost of prescription drugs is one of the top things that we've heard from seniors in particular. So making sure that we allow negotiation to lower costs, to cap insulin at $35 a month for seniors. I think we should do that across the board for everyone, to make sure that we limit the out-of-pocket costs that are required. That's a huge step forward. The Affordable Care Act has also provided coverage, and in the Inflation Reduction Act, we continue the subsidies to families so that they have low-cost health insurance. Also very important. But is there more we need to do? Yes. Healthcare is a right and it should be guaranteed for everyone. We need to make sure that we continue to expand and address the gaps that we have in our system. And that's something that I've been working on and continue to commit to do.
Mr. Cavaleri, what say you?
Well, I would certainly support a kind of hybrid model, if you will. The last thing I would want is the federal government administering a single payer system. You look with the amount of debt we've amassed just the last 5 years alone, that they would probably inevitably bankrupt America within the next 10 years. I support absolute access for everybody to have equal access to healthcare, but that starts with allowing buying pools, buying purchase, allowing insurance companies to cross state lines, to allow different types of options to people to buy into, as opposed to, putting up such restrictions and barriers. If we're going to talk about fixes to healthcare, it has to be to take the red tape away from the insurance industry. Right now, I could go to Oklahoma and I can buy an insurance program for about $600-700 a month, which in Washington State is going to cost me $2,000 a month. So that's clearly broken. There's clearly an option. Having the federal government doing is not. Allowing good old-fashioned American competition cross state lines is how you fix it. And nobody delivers medical care like the American businesses, American workers.
Mr. Cavaleri, immigration. What changes to our immigration system, if any, would you support or propose? Please explain.
Boy, you want to talk about a broken system. One thing I would not support is what we have now, is an open border. Our border agents are absolutely demoralized, dehumanized down there. They're overworked, pushed around. We have 200,000 illegal immigrants crossing into America every single month. And the last I checked my math, that's 2.4 million a year, 4.1 million since this Congress was seated in 2020. So there's plenty of blame to go around, because there is nothing humane about the amount of people dying in the Rio Grande month over month. And there's certainly nothing humane about the amount of fentanyl pouring into the United States. And the sad part of all of it is we know exactly where it is produced, we know where it is shipped, and we know where it is smuggled into the United States. But it seems like they've sat on their hands and done nothing. Right now, the #1 killer of adults 18 to 45 is fentanyl. I think that's one of the saddest things. To date, 100,000 of our young people have lost their lives from overdose already, and still 2 months left in the year. So shutting down the border is one of my top priorities. There are a lot of steps that we could utilize. Congress could take action, and we could use the military to support immigration services down on the border.
Ms. DelBene, please weigh in.
Thank you for the question. Our immigration system has been broken for years, and I strongly believe that Congress needs to take legislative action. That's the only way that we have durable change to modernize our immigration system and our asylum systems. Without legislative action, you're going to see back and forth things like executive actions. And we have to prevent the types of inhumane abuses that we saw during the Trump administration, where kids were taken from their parents. I went down to the border at that time and saw that happen, where they didn't even keep good records about where their parents were, and it made very hard ongoing difficulty in terms of reuniting children. That's not who we are, and our laws need to reflect that. I support comprehensive immigration reform, but Republicans refuse to engage. In my first term in Congress, in fact, I introduced the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. And despite overwhelming bipartisan support, Republicans who were in charge at that time would not allow legislation to come to the floor. So there are bipartisan opportunities on immigration. We passed legislation in the House of Representatives to support dreamers and farm workers, and those still are sitting at the Senate. So Congress needs to act. We've taken action in the House. The Senate needs to.
Thank you. We've come to the point next to the last question in this evening's forum. We've come to the point where we're going to offer each of you the opportunity to ask a question of your opponent. Ms. DelBene, you'll have the opportunity to pose the question first. The question needs to be related to the issues and answers that you've heard during this forum. You have 30 seconds to pose the question. The timer will reflect that. And then the respondent will have 60 seconds to reply to your question. So Ms. DelBene, what would you like to ask of Mr. Cavaleri?
Thank you. Following the 2020 election, you posted on social media, quote, "An impressive body of public evidence demonstrates that voting by mail presents unique opportunities for fraud and abuse," unquote. Washington State, I think, has been an extremely successful model for safe, secure, and accessible voting by mail. So if elected, would you vote in favor of a national law outlawing vote by mail and reducing access to the ballot for millions of Washingtonians?
Good question. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Allowing acts. First of all, Washington State probably has one of the most, I would say, easiest places to vote in the United States if you had to pick one. Almost, for the most part, 100% by mail. A national ban, again, I don't want the federal government involved anywhere where the states are the ones that make the laws. So in Congress, I would not have to make that decision. I don't support it, and I would, I just don't. I don't roll that way. Some of the things that I've written about in the past had to do with fraud. We know that fraud takes place. We know that there is ballot box stuffing that takes place. We've seen it. We've seen the people prosecuted. So again, Washington is a very easy to vote state. Again, elimination of fraud should be everybody's goal at this point.
Thank you for that question and answer. Mr. Cavaleri, what would you like to ask of Ms. DelBene?
So just before you start the timer, I just want to say one word really quick, if I could. Suzan and my campaign, we have really.
You really can't. You really can't.
You could start the timer. Go ahead.
Okay.
We've been a model for decorum, and we haven't played nasty back and forth. So I'm not going to do that now and try to find a gotcha question. I would say this: if a bill came before the congressional floor, thumbs up for term limits, thumbs down for term limits, would you support it? And what would be the threshold for the amount of term limits or the amount of time that someone should serve in the House of Representatives, or any seat for that matter, but the House exclusively to this question?
Thank you for the question. You know, I think, first of all, in the House of Representatives, we have elections, as you know, every 2 years. And voters have the right to make a decision about who is representing them every 2 years. And so I do think that it's incredibly important that folks are engaged and involved. Every member of the House is up every 2 years, and that people vote. And that gives people the opportunity to make changes if they want to see changes in representation and their voices to be heard. So that is the most powerful thing that we have in place that gives voters that opportunity. And I think that is number one. Voters should decide who they want to represent them, and people should take that opportunity to vote. We still have more people in the country who are eligible to vote who don't. My hope is that they will take that opportunity, including in this election, to fill out their ballot and make sure their voice is heard.
Thank you. And your cooperative spirit in this campaign has been evident throughout this conversation, and we appreciate it. Very last question. Mr. Cavaleri, you'll have an opportunity to lead off, and this is your opportunity in 60 seconds to let us know about any additional issues or information that you'd like to bring to the attention of the community.
Okay. First question I would ask is are you better off today than you were 2 years ago? Only in American politics can a party get it so wrong for this amount of time and still ask to stay employed by the American people. 2 years post-pandemic, America should be thriving, and it's not. Out of control inflation, the economy, cost of fuel, crime in the streets, narcotics, the southern border. Take your pick from a myriad of issues. It really would be difficult to find out what this Congress and this administration has gotten right. And this is the byproduct of one party rule and why balance needs to be restored. This is why I'm the better candidate going into this Congress. And I ask for your support because we do need to restore balance back to not just to the House of Representatives, but to the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Cavaleri. Ms. DelBene, you have the last word.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. My core values remain unchanged. As I've done from day one since I was elected, I'll protect Social Security and Medicare. Now that the Supreme Court has overturned 50 years of precedent in the Dobbs decision, and Republicans are talking about a national abortion ban. We need representatives in Congress like me who will stand up against further efforts to roll back our rights and who will defend our democracy and our electoral system as well. As a district and as a country, we face real challenges, and these are serious times, and we need serious leaders, people who have demonstrated that they know how to do the hard work of legislating, of making our often dysfunctional political system produce results that make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans. I've proven I can do that, which is why I'm asking for your support in this election. Thank you.
The League and Forum Coalition appreciate these candidates for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and YouTube channel. Find links at LWVSnoho, that's LWVSNOHO.org. We encourage you to explore additional information about these and all the candidates. The Snohomish County voter pamphlet has been mailed to residents back on October 8th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. Ballots will be mailed on October 20th. Election day is November 8th. Please be a voter. We thank the Snohomish County Forum Coalition members and offer kudos to the League of Women Voters team behind the scenes who made this forum run smoothly. Those include backup moderator Suzan Renard, candidate coordinator Vicki Roberts-Gassler, timer Phyllis Bush, and League Tech Support Karen Crowley. And a special thank you again to Dave Moon and his team of students at TurkPride.tv at the Sultan School District for their excellent technical support. And of course, thank you to all of you for listening and watching. This concludes our candidate forum.